of GlobalGAP in your company. So by the time we will be done with this, all the content of the training, it should be possible for the staff who have participated in the training to be able to provide all the necessary technical assistance to the company and other workers for the implementation of GlobalGAP. I'm expecting this training to run for this month and part of next month, depending on availability and how things are going to go. And we are going to spend maximum 1.5 hours per each training, unless other things require that we stay further than that. But I'll try as much as possible to keep the training within 1.5 hours of each session. What are the objectives for the training? As I said, the overall objective is to support your company to implement the requirements of GlobalGAP. But each aspect of the training also has its own objective, which will lead us to the overall objective. So for this session, we are going to look at the introduction to GlobalGAP. So this session is about introduction to GlobalGAP. By the time we finish with today's session, each participant should be able to explain GlobalGAP as a gap and food safety assurance scheme. Each participant should be able to state the steps involved to get GlobalGAP certified as a company. So in this case, everybody who participates in this training must be able to know the steps that LATC Agro Nigeria should take to become GlobalGAP certified. Then you should also be able to explain the different certification options for GlobalGAP. So as a company, you have to decide which of the available options will be suitable for you to go for, because there are multiple options for GlobalGAP certification. And by the time we finish this training, you should be able to explain the certification options and actually know the one that is best for your company. Then by the end of this training, you should also be able to navigate the GlobalGAP website and download your GlobalGAP checklist. Okay, so I'll take you through. So these are the 4 main objectives for today's session. So when we finish the session, you have to check yourself whether you will be able to do some of the things or all of the things stated here in the objective. So I lost you guys, eh? Whoa. Hello, can you all hear me, please? Hello.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, great. And please, if you have any question, just stop me, because I'm going to run fast so that I can save time for you to go and continue with your activity. So in case you have any question or you have any point to make, just stop me, and then you have the opportunity to proceed. Now, when we talk about good agricultural practices is founded on 4 principles. Okay, every aspect of good agricultural practices, from pre-production, production, up to the type of transportation, is founded on 4 main principles. And these 4 main principles are the things that you should take into consideration when you are implementing anything concerning good agricultural practices. The first is food safety. So everything you are doing from pre-production to the time of transportation or to the time the produce leaves your care, the idea of food safety must be an important consideration. Then economic viability. Of course, every business is looking for profit. So we are not saying that by going through good agricultural practices, you should go in such a way that your company will not be profitable. So as you are implementing those things, economic viability should also be an important consideration. You shouldn't produce at a loss. Then environmental sustainability. Also, you have to make sure that the practices of good agricultural practices that you are implementing are not being damaging to the environment, or they are not causing any harm to the environment, both physical environment and biological environment. So in this case, I mean plants and animals, land, and all other aspects within the environment. Then social acceptability. So whatever you are doing concerning good agricultural practices, social acceptability should also be an important factor to consider. So when we talk about social acceptability, we are talking about things like workers' health and safety and workers' health welfare, as well as even the community in which you are carrying out your operations. Are your activities having a negative impact on the fabric of the society? Are you treating people fairly? Are you being are you not trampling on the rights of people, whether they are working for you or they are not working for you? So this is what we mean by social acceptability. So when, as a company, when you come to implementing anything concerning good agricultural practices, you should be able to ensure that the things you are doing, you have factored in these four main principles. Okay. These four main principles have been considered by the Food and Agriculture Organization. And according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, all these things listed here, soil, animal production, harvest and on-farm processing, storage, water, animal health and welfare, energy management and waste. For those who are doing animal production, the way they produce their fodder, human welfare and safety, crop protection, wildlife and landscape. So these are, when you are developing your good agricultural practices, these are the major elements. So even if we take the GlobalGAP standard, for example, you see that all these elements have questions in the GlobalGAP standards that you have to answer. When you are talking about soil, they are asking you specific questions about the way you handle and treat your soil. When we are talking about harvest and on-farm storage, the way you are doing these things, there are questions you should answer. So these are the main major chapters. When you are developing your good agricultural practices, these are the major things you should touch on. And you see later on that the GlobalGAP standard touches on all these things, because these are the basic things which must be handled according to FAO recommendation. Now let's come to GlobalGAP itself. So we've heard about GlobalGAP and so on and so forth. But today we are going to look at let me call it the official explanation to what GlobalGAP is. Okay. Let me also make an announcement, take this opportunity to make an announcement that GlobalGAP is running a series of free training. I have communicated by email to some of your managers, and you can join. The managers who can join when the time comes. And in that webinar, you receive free trainings, free explanation about GlobalGAP. Okay. So what is the objective of GlobalGAP? GlobalGAP was established, let me say that it is a private scheme. Okay, so GlobalGAP is not a legislation, and it is not a government scheme. It is a private scheme. The GlobalGAP organization is a private entity based in Germany. So it is a private scheme. But why is such a private scheme having so much impact on the world market of fresh produce specifically? Why? Have you asked yourself that question before? That why can such a private scheme be so important that even countries are supporting their companies to have those standards? The answer is simple. Most of these private certification schemes are consumer driven. It is the consumers in the destination market or the importing countries who are driving such initiatives. So as a producer, your aim is to satisfy your consumer, and that is why you find yourself having to do everything possible to go for GlobalGAP certification, because it is the consumers who are behind it, even though it's a private scheme. But the consumers are demanding that as a producer, you should meet certain standards before they will find your produce acceptable to buy. Okay, so you realize that GlobalGAP is almost worldwide because consumers are really pushing for such private voluntary standard. So as a certification entity or as a standard developing entity, GlobalGAP has been established. Their aim is to establish a single standard for good agricultural practices applicable to different sectors and produce of agriculture. So this is the basic objective of GlobalGAP as an organization. Okay, so their aim is to establish a single standard of good agricultural practices. So all the things that we saw before, all the recommendations that FAO has provided to be followed when we are discussing good agricultural practices, GlobalGAP is aiming at providing a single standard that answers all those things. And once you subscribe to GlobalGAP, they can be sure that you are meeting all those things that are expected of you. Secondly, GlobalGAP is a scheme which seeks to provide global verification framework. So GlobalGAP is providing a verification framework for the consumers. How can a consumer verify your compliance to standards? So GlobalGAP is stepping in to provide their standard to assure the consumer that you have been verified to be complying with those requirements of good agricultural practices. And then moreover, GlobalGAP aims to increase consumers' confidence in food safety. So all the good agricultural practices that you are going to implement, they should answer some questions about food safety. So once you go GlobalGAP, the aim of GlobalGAP is to increase the consumer's confidence, okay, in food safety. So once you are certified, whichever consumer is buying your produce has better confidence that your food or your produce are safe for consumption. So in this case, majority of the principles underlying GlobalGAP standard are focused on food safety. So this will give an assurance to the consumer. And then GlobalGAP is a pre-farm gate standard. So when we say pre-farm gate standard, it means that whatever certificate you are going to get after being certified to GlobalGAP, the certificate covers all your pre-production activities up to the time your produce leaves your farm or your company. So it is a pre-farm gate standard. Once the produce leaves your domain or your farm, GlobalGAP standard does not apply again. So it is a pre-farm gate standard. Okay, so this is a basic explanation of what GlobalGAP is. Right, if you have any question, you can ask before we proceed. Any question? Okay, can we proceed? Right.
Yes, let's proceed.
All right. So what are the certification options? The GlobalGAP standard has multiple options to suit the needs of each producer. Okay, so every company must look at the options available to them and choose the one that will meet your needs in terms of cost, in terms of your operation complexities, and the exigencies of your operations. Basically, there are two options, option 1 and option 2. So let's look at option 1. Option 1 applies to individual or a single producer. For example, LATC is a single producer. LATC is not producing your crops by relying on others or by aggregating from others. So you are a single producer. So option 1 applies to single producers. So in this case, the individual producer or the company applies and holds the certificate in their name. And it covers all aspects of the production process, the kind of things we have listed before now. So it covers your pre-production, your production, harvest, storage, and so on, until the produce leaves your farm. Now, when you talk about option 1, there are 3 variations. Okay, there are 3 variations to option 1. The first variation is the single producer who is producing everything as a single entity. Okay, so they can go for option 1. Then you also have other companies who are producing under different entities. So for example, you have the LATC group. Okay, so the LATC group may have LATC Agro. Maybe they'll specialize in greenhouse. Then they'll have LATC Agro again, another legal entity. Maybe they are specialized in open production. When this happens, you are a multi-site. So we call it option 1, multi-site. So you have different legal entities, but the same group, but those entities are entirely independent. So in this case, you can go for option 1 with multi-site. That means your production sites are multiple. And then you can decide to apply quality management system or not. So when we say quality management system, these are internal rules and regulations which will be developed in accordance with GlobalGAP requirements and which will be applied to the different entities. So LATC can develop an internal quality management system which applies to the various independent entities that are within the group. So in this case, when that happens, you are option 1 with multi-site and quality management system. Then the third variation is that you can be a multi-site, but you can decide not to operate with a quality management system. As we go on, we will explain further what a quality management system is. So the third variation is you can decide to go without the quality management system. In this case, LATC Agro will not develop any internal policies and procedures to govern the individual entities, but the individual entities will all operate with the expected requirement of GlobalGAP. So this is the option 1, which is available. We will explain further when we proceed further in the training. Then option 2. Option 2 applies to entities that are producing as a group. So in this case, we are talking about cooperatives and farmer-based organizations that are producing as a group. So in this case, you have individual farmers who are part of a group, and the group will apply for the certificate in their name, but then the certificate will be applicable to each member of the group. So this is option 2. Let me give you an example of when an option 2 can apply for LATC. Let's say in future, LATC starts exporting as expected, and LATC now gets a lot of orders for the year that your own production cannot meet those orders. So LATC decides to rely on other smallholder farmers within your environment or within your area to produce, to supplement your own production. Once you do that, it means that the smallholder farmers you are buying from, or even if you are buying from a different entity, they must also be compliant with the requirement of GlobalGAP. You cannot be buying from a producer which is not complying with GlobalGAP or which is not certified and sell it as a GlobalGAP produce. So in this case, you must get those people also certified. You can let those people form a group, let's say a cooperative, and then the cooperative will go for the certificate. And then once you buy from that cooperative, you'll be allowed to sell it as a GlobalGAP certified produce. So in that case, the cooperative or the smallholder farmer group will now go for option 2 certification for GlobalGAP. So these are the 2 options in the various variations when we are talking about GlobalGAP certification. So every company must look at the option that suits their situation and which is more cost effective to them, and then you go for that option. Any question, please? Okay. Any question? All right, we can proceed. Okay. Now let's look at how the GlobalGAP standard is organized. The GlobalGAP standard is organized as you can see on the screen. So you have requirement for all farm base. So this means that this requirement is applicable to every sector of production or every sector of operation which is covered by GlobalGAP. And it means that whether you are a crop producer, whether you are a poultry producer, whether you are producing tea or coffee, the requirements under all farm base must be met. Once you meet all those requirements, then you now go into your produce specific rules. So in this case, you go, if you are doing crops, you have to meet the crop-based rules. And if you are doing livestock, for example, poultry or cattle, you have to meet the livestock rules. Once you meet your crop-based rules, now you have to go into the crop-specific rules. So the crop-specific rules, you have fruit and vegetables, combinable crops, coffee, tea, flowers, and ornamental. So once you meet this, you are doing fruit and vegetables. So you come straight to the fruit and vegetable standard and you try to meet it. So for LATC to be certified, first of all, you need to meet all farm-based requirements, you need to meet the crop-based requirements, and you need to meet the fruit and vegetables requirements. And this is the level of requirements you have to meet, the way you have to meet the requirements. So the rest, you are not in that aspect, so I will not talk about it for now. Please, any questions so far? Okay, let's proceed.
There's a question.
Okay, please go ahead.
Please, the certification you are talking about,
yeah.
Which body regulates the certification? I would like to know what the certification is regulated.
Okay, so the certification is regulated by GlobalGAP. So GlobalGAP is actually the name of the organization, as well as it is the name of the certification scheme itself. So they are based in Germany, but GlobalGAP doesn't certify. GlobalGAP doesn't audit. GlobalGAP uses third-party certification bodies to issue the certificate. But there are rules that these certification bodies must also meet. So we will get to the steps and you realize that you have to choose a certification body yourself as a company. And that certification body will sign a license agreement with your company. And that license agreement will now be sent to GlobalGAP. So GlobalGAP develops the standard and the rules concerning the use of the standard or the requirement of the standard. They don't provide the certification. The certification is provided by a third party. Okay, so if you are talking about who is behind this certification, it is the GlobalGAP organization. The name of the organization and the name of the certification is the same. So sometimes you feel that you don't know whether you are talking about the organization or the certification scheme itself because the name is the same. But when it comes to issuing you with a certificate of conformance, that one is done by a third party, which has been approved by GlobalGAP. Are you okay with your question?
Yes.
Yes, it's okay, but there's some other questions.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'm looking at the combinations above, especially for the crops base.
Yeah.
What of someone who is doing, let me say, fruit trees alone, like someone is doing lychee, is doing avocado, and is doing macadamia? Which category will that farmer lie?
Okay, the farmer will still lie in the fruit and vegetable category. However, when you go through the requirement, there will be certain things that will not be applicable to that particular operation. So for example, you are doing only fruit, but you are not doing vegetables. You still use the fruits and vegetables, but when you get to some requirements which are applicable to vegetables, but not applicable to fruit, those requirements will not be applicable to you. So in that case, you'll be given the option to select not applicable.
Thank you.
All right. Any other question? Okay, let's proceed. So let's look at the steps. When you want to get your GlobalGAP certification, what are the steps that you have to take at the company level? Okay, so this is not at the individual level, but at the company level. What are the steps that you should take in order to get your certificate? And there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps to take before you can get your certificate. The first one is to determine why you think GlobalGAP certification will benefit your company. Because Going for GlobalGAP involves cost. Okay, going for GlobalGAP involves cost, and the cost is not something that is a peanut. Okay, it involves cost. So first of all, as a company, you need to determine why you think GlobalGAP certification will benefit you. And how can you determine that? If your buyer requires it, or if your market requires it. So until you want to enter into a certain market, or until you have an important buyer that is requiring it, then think about it before you go for the certification. Because if you go for the certification and you don't have market, it means that the whole cost and all the time you have spent will go waste. So the first thing is to determine your market, determine how the certificate will benefit you as a company. Then the second thing is to conduct a gap assessment to establish your state of compliance with the GlobalGAP requirement. Okay, by using the latest version. So this step is what I did for you when I came there 2 years ago. So I actually did a gap assessment for your company, and the report is with your management, and that is what has resulted in this training. So I think the first 2 steps, we have already taken them. We have determined why we need GlobalGAP. We have conducted a gap assessment to establish our state of compliance. The next thing to do is to develop an action plan for the things that must be done for full compliance. So we have the action plan in place, which we are implementing. So this training is part of the action plan. Okay, so step 3 has also been tackled. Then the next step is to perform an internal audit or internal self-assessment. So after we implement our action plan and all the gaps we identify have been closed, we now perform an internal self-assessment by using the GlobalGAP checklist to see whether our actions have brought us into conformance or not. So we will do this later. Then after we perform our internal assessment, we take corrective action. Anything that we will discover that is not in conformance with the GlobalGAP requirements, we take corrective actions to correct those things. Then once we are sure that we have done all those things and our operations are in full conformance according to our internal self-assessment and the corrective actions taken, we will now identify and select a certification body. Okay, so there are approved certification body on the GlobalGAP website. So you as a company must select a certification body to work with. GlobalGAP will not do that for you because GlobalGAP is not involved in the certification process. They develop the standard and the rules. So at this stage, you identify a certification body and then you put in an application to the certification body. And you have to make sure that the certification body is approved for GlobalGAP certification. You have a lot of certification body which have been approved for different certification schemes. So you have to make sure that the one you are selecting have been approved to certify GlobalGAP. So once you select, you make an application to your selected certification body. Once you make the application to the body, the certification body, they will send you some forms to fill, or they will collect some data from you or some information from you. Once they collect the information from you and they are satisfied, they would sign what we call the sub-license agreement with your company. So before you go for your audit, your certification body must sign a sub-license agreement with you, because without this sub-license agreement, GlobalGAP will not recognize that certification body your relationship with the certification body. GlobalGAP will not recognize it. So you have to make sure that your certification body that you select will sign the sub-license agreement with them. Then once you sign the sub-license agreement, you will now be discussing the date for the initial inspection. So that one will be between you and the certification body by choosing an appropriate date for the initial inspection. Now, when you are choosing the date, it is mandatory that they should observe your harvesting. So you cannot choose a date where you are not doing harvesting. So every date you choose, in fact, the certification body will give you all this information. But let me say it ahead, that when you are negotiating for a date for audit, GlobalGAP requires that your harvesting process should be observed by the auditor. So whatever date you choose, you must make sure that that date, there will be some harvesting activity to be observed. So these are the 9 steps that you have to go through as a company if you intend to go for GlobalGAP certification. Any questions so far, please? Hi. Any question? All right, we can proceed. Okay, so now let's look at the GlobalGAP website, because you should be able to know how to use the GlobalGAP website to access information. So this is the address of the website, www.globalgap.org. Okay, so I'm going to take you to the website so that we can look at the various things there. Okay, so this is the current view of the GlobalGAP website. So you see that you have all the necessary basic information that you must get to be able to understand the requirement of GlobalGAP. So you can take your time to go through the website to read as much as you can. But today I want to focus on how to get your document from this website. Okay, so you look at the top here, you see jobs, database, certification bodies. So this is where you come to choose your certification body. Once you click it, you see all the list of certification body by country. So if you prefer a certification body in Nigeria and there is one, you can choose. If you prefer a certification body from other places, you can still choose. So this is where you come to choose your certification body. Then you can also see the list of approved consultants. They are here. Then you can see some frequently asked questions. Then you see documents. So this is my point of interest for today, documents. All the standards concerning GlobalGAP are free of charge, okay? And they can be downloaded at the document center. So this is the document center for GlobalGAP. Once you come here, you click on the documents, and then you get this page. Okay, so this page is basically the home of GlobalGAP Document Center, and every standard they release is released through this document center. Whether it's an update or it's a new standard, it's always released here. So once you go for GlobalGAP certification, you should be visiting the document center as frequently as you can to see whether there are any new changes. Now, when you scroll down to this document center, you see that all the standards that GlobalGAP has developed and all the rules and guidelines are on this document center. But there are a lot of documents here. Okay, more than 100 or so. But when you come to the left-hand side, this side, when you come to the left-hand side, you can filter to select the document that you want. So let's come here. Let me reset. So I click on reset. Okay, so now I'm on reset. Let's say I'm looking for the latest GlobalGAP standard for fruits and vegetables. Okay, so I'm looking for integrated farm assurance. So I click on it. Okay, then I choose my language. When you come down, you see your language. Which language do you want the standard? I want it in English. So I come here and I choose English. Then I come to the document type. Okay, so the document type. Am I looking for a checklist? Am I looking for a control point, or am I looking for a version update? Or am I looking for general regulation or not? All the document types are here. So you choose the document type that you want. In this case, I'm looking for a checklist. So I select checklist. Once I select the checklist, I come to the target group. Am I a certification body, or am I a producer, or am I a farm assurer, or am I a benchmark scheme? We are producers, so I choose producers. Then once I choose producers, I come to the sub-scope. So which sub-scope am I looking for the standard on? I'm looking for sub-scope fruit and vegetables. So I choose fruit and vegetables. Now you see that the document I have all the checklists on fruit and vegetable, and the latest one is always on the top. So the latest checklist is version 5.2. Version 5.2. So I choose all farm-based, crop-based, fruit and vegetable-based. Then you click on it and you download it. You see that it has downloaded on my screen here, and this is it. Okay, so this is the document I just downloaded. Integrated farm assurance, all farm-based, crop-based, fruit and vegetable. So this is actually the document which the auditor is going to use to audit you. So it's important that you download it yourself and go through it. Okay, so that is how to download your checklist on the GlobalGAP website. Okay, so please do well to go through the website. There is a lot of information on the website. And let me say that the website is actually part of the GlobalGAP normative document. In our next session, we will look at the normative document, the documents which are relevant to your company. We'll look at them, but they consider the website as part of it. So when there is any update to your checklist and the auditor comes and you don't have the latest update, you have yourself to blame, because they expect you to visit the website as part of the normative document you are supposed to visit. So you have no excuse to tell the auditor that you were not aware that GlobalGAP has released an update, because they expect you to use the website. So please, there is so much information there. I can't go through all. So take your time and go through it. Please, any question so far? Okay, let's proceed. Okay, so
let's go ahead.
Please come again.
No question, just go ahead, please.
Okay. So this ends today's session. So before we end, let me explain the next steps. So this training will be every Tuesday and Thursday, 11 o'clock a.m. Lagos time. And it will be, as I said earlier, maximum 1 hour, 30 minutes, we should be done. So today, let's go back to our objectives and try to assess ourselves. Okay, so how do you assess yourself on these objectives so far? Can you explain GlobalGAP as a good agricultural practices and food safety assurance scheme? Okay, as a manager or as a supervisor, when you go to the field to work with your staff, can you explain this point to them well? Can you state the steps involved to get GlobalGAP certified as a company? Okay, so can you explain the different certification options for GlobalGAP? Can you navigate the GlobalGAP website to download your checklist? Are you confident that you can perform these activities based on this short training we have had? If you cannot, let me know so that I can clarify for you.
Anybody who understand any part, please come forward. I think it's a very clear thing. It's very straightforward.
Okay. Great. I'm happy about that. Okay, so in our next, let me show the training schedule so that we can know what we are going to do next. Okay, so in our next session, which will be on Thursday, we are going to look at the GlobalGAP normative document. And I'll explain in that training what we mean by normative document. We are going to look at the general regulations. So we have general regulations, we'll look at it. Then we'll look at control points and compliance criteria. So when we say control point and compliance criteria, what are we talking about? We will look at it, and then we will look at some aspect of the checklist which you have downloaded. So please download the checklist for our next session of the training. So these are the 4 things we will look at in our next session. Let me also say that these first 2 sessions are just introductory sessions, okay? So after these 2 sessions, we are going to look at the implementation proper, okay? So when we say you are going to do rates assessment. What do we mean by that? I'm going to take you through step-by-step process of how to actually do some of the things expected of you in the checklist. But before we can achieve that, you must be familiar with the checklist and the things in it. So that is why we need to do this foundation and introduction training before we go into the things proper. So once we go into the things proper, we are going to do a lot of practical things. And sometimes we will still work in groups. So when we get there, we will decide whether we should do it department by department or we should do it collectively. We'll decide in our next session. So this ends our training for today. And if somebody has any clarification to seek or any comment to make, the floor is open. Otherwise, we'll end. Okay, so can you put your camera on again for me, please? Okay. Okay, so there are no questions, so we will end for now.